This series contains real stories from a poisoning outbreak, told from the perspective of an investigation unfolding in real time as we search for clues and answers. It includes severe illness and death. Some moments may be difficult to hear. The views and opinions expressed on this series represent the people speaking them, and not any organization they are affiliated with. This podcast discusses medical and food safety topics, but it is for education and storytelling only. It is not medical advice and makes no claims about the safety of any food. If you are concerned about a possible poisoning or the safety of any food, contact your local poison center for free personalized medical advice. In the U.S., that number is 1-800-222-1222.
6 people are now dead. Authorities say poisoned Tylenol capsules reached store shelves.
Dozens became ill after drinking coffee investigators believe was deliberately poisoned.
Health officials are tracking a cluster of lead poisonings linked to a popular fruit pouch sold for children. Investigators suggest the contamination may have been intentional.
A train carrying hazardous chemicals derailed overnight, forcing thousands from their homes.
Officials believe a toxic ingredient may be behind illnesses at a restaurant. Investigators are focused on a spice that should never have been in food. Experts say even a tiny amount can be fatal.
Several deaths are now being reviewed.
More than 50 people have reported symptoms. State health officials are now working to find the source.
The company is offering a $100,000 reward for information on who may have added the poison.
Authorities are calling it a poisoning.
A mass poisoning.
Another outbreak.
A poisoning outbreak.
An outbreak. An outbreak.
An outbreak.
A mass poisoning outbreak.
Hey everybody, Ryan with a quick interruption. This series only exists because of listeners like you. There are no sponsors, institutions, or billionaires quietly bankrolling this in the background. Just a lot of time, research, and production to bring these stories to life. And there are real costs that come with that. Editing software, sound design, website hosting, podcast hosting, advertising to get the word out, and a lot more. So if you're finding value in it, there are a few ways you can support the show. The first is to go to thepoisonlab.com/support and become a supporting member for as little as $1 a month. And for that, you are going to get access to every single episode ad-free and access to amazing bonus content. You get access to all of that by becoming a supporting member. But if you want to support the show and get something a little more tangible in return, there are 2 educational projects I've built alongside this series you should check out. The first is Poisonous Fungus Among Us. This is a short, simple, rhyming book about mushroom foraging safety. It's built for kids, families, curious foragers. It's a 7-minute read. It uses real, beautiful photographs of poisonous mushrooms and delivers scientifically accurate information in a way that rhymes. You can find it on Amazon by searching Poisonous Fungus Among Us, and it's also free on Kindle Unlimited. The second project is called Gotta Pick 'em. It is a poisonous mushroom card game designed by toxicologists who treat mushroom poisoning. It's a simple, fast-paced card game, but underneath it, you're learning how different mushroom poisons work, what organs they impact, the basics about their anatomy, antidotes we use for them, and you actually don't need to know anything about mushrooms to play. You can find out way more about it at gottapickem.com, which is the companion blog that will teach you not only how to play, but a lot more about poisonous mushrooms. So, if you want to support independent public health storytelling like this, you can find links to all of those options in the show notes. But you don't have to pay anything to support the show. Just being here or sharing this with someone who might learn from it goes a long way. So thank you for listening. Let's get back to the show. Welcome back to A Morel Dilemma. It's Wednesday, April 19th, 2 days after the first fatalities in Bozeman, Montana. We know who got sick, and we know what it looked like. We even know our public health investigators have ruled out any common bacteria that could be at the center of this. But there's still one question we have not answered. What was the cause of this outbreak? We have an early signal pointing at a morel mushroom. But in an outbreak like this, it's not enough to have a theory. you need to find the poison. Whether it's something inside the morel, something on the morel, or something else entirely. So today we're going to follow that process and learn how investigators hunt for a poison they may not even know exists. Now, in our last episode, we met the public health investigators Heather Demarest and Rachel Hindenkamp, who were on the front lines of containing this outbreak and trying to figure out what the cause was. The sushi restaurant had been shut down, and samples of a morel mushroom and salmon had been sent to the FDA lab for testing. They even sent patient samples of stool and urine. From my perspective, they had done a fantastic job in containing an outbreak, but they still needed help. They didn't know if this was a local or national problem. So they had to reach out for backup.
On April 19th, I looped in our CDC and FDA partners to let them know about this outbreak investigation and our suspect, the morel mushroom. Since we knew food product received here had also been sent to other states.
When Rachel reached out to the CDC for help, the case landed on the desk of Dr. Michael Yeh.
I'm Michael Yeh. I'm a medical toxicology physician at CDC's National Center for Environmental Health.
Lieutenant Commander Michael Yeh, or Dr. Yeh as you'll hear me call him, is a U.S. Public Health Service officer, and he's one of the CDC's top investigators when it comes to things like mass poisonings. He's a medical toxicologist, just like Dr. Bassett from the previous episode, and he's also an emergency and internal medicine physician. That's 3 board certifications. This seems like the kind of person you would want helping you investigate what caused a mass poisoning outbreak.
So where I work, we deal with chemical exposures as well as non-infectious disease outbreaks of unknown origin. And very often it starts with somebody asking the question, could this be tox? Where you have a cluster of people coming down with unusual signs and symptoms, and an infectious agent is either not identified or not thought to be the most likely cause. So CDC over the years has played key roles in many high-profile investigations.
Really, quite a lot of them. Dr. Yeh rattled off more than I could count.
Synthetic cannabinoids contaminated with modificals, mass poisoning in Mozambique, hypoglycemia in northern India, toxic oil syndrome, aflatoxin in Kenya, lead exposures among children who ate cinnamon applesauce powder, eosinophilia myalgia syndrome linked to L-tryptophan supplements.
Many of these outbreaks led to important changes in our society, like in 1938, when diethylene glycol in a pharmaceutical killed a bunch of children, causing the FDA to come into existence to regulate pharmaceuticals. And while diethylene glycol has gone from the United States, it sadly is still prevalent in the rest of the world.
And then there's diethylene glycol. That, unfortunately, is something that pops up over and over again. Recently, in 2022, we supported the Ministry of Health in the Gambia for an outbreak of acute kidney failure among children who consume cold and cough medicine syrups contaminated with diethylene glycol. Interestingly, with that investigation, a lot of people first went down the infectious route because a lot of these kids spiked fevers early on in their course of illness. So it makes sense to look for an infectious cause first. But it turned out that it was the medications. And if you think about it in hindsight, that makes sense. The kids probably came down with some kind of viral syndrome or other cause of a febrile illness. Then the parents gave them the over-the-counter cold medicine and cough syrup, and it was the medicine that poisoned them rather than whatever was making them sick initially.
That sounds like a really complicated thing to tease out. What a red herring. That's the danger in outbreaks like this. The obvious answer can be wrong. And in Bozeman, we're facing that same risk. So to avoid going down the wrong path, you want to bring in people who have dodged a red herring before, like the CDC. What's the trigger to get the CDC involved? At what point does something go from a local public health outbreak to a CDC national kind of?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because we often hear people ask, what is the formal process? So CDC has to be invited in to assist in an investigation, right? So it's not like you see on TV where someone just shows up, flashes a badge and says, I'm from CDC and I'm here to take over. That kind of thing just doesn't happen. There are many ways to communicate with us at CDC. We usually suggest that you first contact your local health department. That's actually the best place to start in most cases. Then they can involve state and federal agencies as needed. In the case of this outbreak investigation, individuals ate at the restaurant on the 17th and got sick that same day. By the next day, the 18th, the Gallatin City County Health Department immediately inspected the restaurant. They really acted very quickly on this. And then one day after that, on April 19th, the Montana Health Department requested epidemiologic assistance from both CDC and FDA.
Wow. So when they called you, what was your initial hypothesis regarding the cause of the outbreak when you heard about the sources? Was, I guess, poisoning immediately suspected, or were infectious agents being considered?
This situation was unique because of the severity of the symptoms. The symptoms started very soon after the meal. I think the median onset time was about 1 hour. So that's really faster than the onset time of most foodborne illnesses. So it suggests that there was some kind of preformed toxin in the food. So we had to work to explore different causes, such as infectious agents, at the same time as toxic substances. And in the initial email our team received, there was an inquiry about requesting lab testing for toxic chemicals. However, it's also important to recognize that it really is the epidemiologic data that would drive any testing decisions in any outbreak investigation.
Do you mean, interviewing patients, determining what they actually ate, and determining their symptoms, right?
Exactly. You don't typically just take a shotgun approach and just order every lab you can order. You want a clear rationale for what you're ordering. So we needed to do the detective work that would then help guide the testing. Identifying the food that's responsible for causing illness in a restaurant outbreak can often be very challenging. So we planned that very closely with our partners in Montana. And I have to say, it was the local investigators at the county health department who did an excellent job teasing out this history. I'm telling this story from an office here in Atlanta, but our colleagues right there in Bozeman were the ones who actually went to the restaurant and asked the questions and did all the hard work. So working together, our whole team identified any restaurant patrons who got sick, and we compared what they ate to other diners who did not get sick. We had to cast a very wide net. So we even had to consider things like spices and sauces. And one example of a spice being responsible for mass poisoning actually happened not too long ago in 2022. Some people got very sick after eating at a Chinese restaurant, and the restaurant staff used a spice powder that they thought was dried sand ginger. However, it turned out that this powder that they had was mislabeled. It wasn't sand ginger at all, but actually wolfsbane or monkshood. That's a highly toxic plant that contains the infamous sodium channel opener, aconitine.
Aconitine, or aconite, as it's often called, comes from the monkshood plant, which, unlike the morel, we've known this plant could kill people since Greek mythology. And it's not just theoretical. As Dr. Ye said, this exact toxin was behind a real mass poisoning in 2022.
Tonight's top story: authorities are investigating a mass poisoning in Markham after multiple restaurant patrons collapsed and several were hospitalized. Investigators now believe a toxic herb, aconite, may have been mistakenly used in the food.
Sound familiar? Dozens of people all eating the same dish, all getting sick. Not unlike Bozeman. But in that outbreak, the main ingredient was not the problem. It was the spice hiding alongside it. And that's how easy it is to get misled. If you lock on to the first signal, you can miss what's really causing the outbreak. Just like in the Gambia, where the fevers were pointing people towards infection, but the real culprit was the cough syrup. You have to look at everything.
Interestingly, the fact that this was a sushi restaurant actually made things a little bit easier, because although ingredients were combined in different ways to make the various sushi rolls, For most dishes, there were no further cooking processes that might have complicated things even more. So before we collected detailed food consumption data formally in the questionnaires, we had heard anecdotally that people who got sick ate sushi rolls that contained morel mushrooms and salmon. So salmon was also high on the list of potential causes. As we all know, that spoiled or contaminated fish can certainly cause severe diarrhea and vomiting. Now, the other ingredients used in the sushi rolls, like the rice, seaweed, mixed vegetables, were thought to be less likely culprits since those were used in many other dishes as well. The morel and salmon rolls stood out. So those food samples had to be collected early on in the investigation and stored properly for testing later before they either rotted or got discarded.
Once you had identified your possible culprits, what were the next steps in in testing?
You really need to get a thorough history and form your differential diagnosis and decide on targeted testing.
Targeted testing. This means looking at what the most likely toxin or pathogen would be and doing a test that can find it. This is a really important part of any outbreak, but I'm probably not the right person to tell you about it. Instead, let's hear from some people who have actually done this in real poisoning outbreaks.
Bryn Shermer, I'm the section head for the lab here, the Center for Veterinary Drug Residues. It's located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in Canada.
Hi, I'm Randy Purvis. I'm the research scientist here.
Dr. Randy Purvis and Bryn Shermer are the analytical chemists who actually identified the aconite in that mass poisoning in Ontario we just talked about. Actually, I got to sit down with the entire team behind that outbreak, the physicians, toxicologists, and lab experts who figured it all out. And that full conversation is in the subscriber feed if you want to go deeper into that case. But I brought Bryn and Dr. Purvis here because they can help explain something really important. The two different ways you can detect a poison during a mass poisoning outbreak. And the first way is what they did in that aconite outbreak in Canada.
Our name, Center for Veterinary Drug Residues, does the main reason for what we're doing, which is testing veterinary drug residues in foods of animal origin. But we are first and foremost analytical chemists, so we often get asked to do other types of analyses. And in this case, we were asked to look at samples that were involved in that food poisoning incident.
Do you remember the first call you got about that?
So actually, it was through our national headquarters. We're contacted because of the cases that were presenting in emergency rooms.
In your national headquarters, that would be like your Canadian CDC?
More like the USDA, actually, because of the food angle.
By the time you were contacted, were they suspecting aconitine? Did they ask you to look for aconitine?
They asked us to look for aconitine, yeah. I think it's maybe just the presentation of the symptoms that are observed in the ER.
Sometimes in a mass poisoning, like the one in Canada, you catch a break where the symptoms of aconite poisoning are so specific, you know you should test for aconite. Then you call up Bryn and Randy, they run the test, and you've got your culprit. So this is the first way you can find a poison, targeted testing. Now, targeted testing played an important role in Bozeman too, but it wasn't so simple. We don't know of any toxin inside of a morel mushroom to test for, and the symptoms patients had were broad, nausea and vomiting, things that could be caused by a lot of different poisons and bacteria. So instead of doing a targeted test for one or two poisons, the CDC and FDA compiled a massive list of just about anything they could think of that would lead to these symptoms and started doing targeted tests for them one by one.
CDC has an enteric diseases laboratory branch, and they tested stool specimens from 2 patients for Clostridium perfringens enterotoxin, and those tests were negative. They also tested some of the morel mushroom and salmon samples for staphylococcal enterotoxin and Bacillus cereus diarrheal enterotoxin, and those results were negative as well. Now, FDA has a network of labs around the country. So in Seattle, they have a human and animal food lab. They also analyzed the morel mushroom and salmon samples for pesticides. I have to say, though, FDA's lab testing was quite extensive. I was actually really impressed because I remember reviewing a spreadsheet with a list of pesticides that they tested for, and there were more than 900 compounds listed in there, just the pesticide residues. FDA also has the National Forensic Chemistry Center. They analyzed specimens for a wider range of toxins and poisons. So this included looking for heavy metals. They looked for substances like alpha amanitin, that's the hepatotoxic cyclopeptide that's found in various Amanita species. They also looked for cerulide, which is the Bacillus cereus emetic toxin.
Now, if you're not used to hearing that kind of list Dr. Ye just went through, it might not mean much to you, but what they're describing here is extremely thorough testing, far beyond what you would ever get if you showed up to the hospital with mysterious poisoning symptoms. They weren't just looking for one or two things. They were looking for everything they could reasonably think of, including one possibility we've been circling this whole time.
So one interesting thing that happened was throughout this investigation, we would have regular briefing calls with our various state and other external partners. And every time we had a call, there would be someone who would raise their hand and say, "Are you sure these were morels and not false morels?" So finally, the FDA's Forensic Chemistry Center did DNA sequencing to just nail down the exact species. So they identified the species as Mortella sextillata. So this is a known edible true morel mushroom. Now, SCC also tested for gyrometrin, which would be found in certain species of false morels. They also tested for hydrazine and methylhydrazine, and all of those test results were negative.
Wow. That's a big moment. The CDC saw the same signal we did, deadly mushrooms and something that looks like a morel, and did targeted testing to rule out the false morel. And not only did they confirm this is a true morel in the outbreak, but they went looking for false morel poisons and didn't find any. Nothing was cooked into this batch. At this point, there aren't many explanations left. They've ruled out common bacteria, deadly mushroom mix-ups, and over 900 man-made chemicals. And we don't know of any poison in a morel to test for. I'm struggling to think what else this could be. So is the CDC. Dr. Ye told me they even took tissue samples from the deceased patients and put them under the microscope looking for patterns of cellular injury. Anything that would point towards a clue. And still, nothing. So when all the poisons you can think of are coming up negative, how do you find a poison that you've never even thought of? That's our next type of testing, untargeted analysis. Have you had experience where you didn't know what the toxin was and you guys had to help identify what could be on there?
We actually have another sample that came to us through other means to see if it was aconitine, and it wasn't. But we were able to actually suggest another toxin through the non-targeted workflow that we have. That's where Randy's expertise comes into it.
Randy, would you be able to explain the broad differences between a targeted and a non-targeted analysis?
I'll give it a try. So in your biological samples, there are literally thousands and thousands of compounds in there. So when you're doing targeted, we know what we're looking for, so we can make our methods so that we can specifically find these things in there. So for thousands and thousands of compounds in there, if you're only looking at 5, it's much easier to make a method for that than if somebody comes up to you with the sample and says what's in here. And that moves into what the untargeted is. That's kind of frightening, because now you got to start going through literally thousands of compounds. And one of the problems is that right now, this is all fairly new. There are libraries that help you identify the compounds, but these libraries are only starting to grow.
I doubt there's a library that's characterized every molecule in a morel mushroom.
Right. Exactly.
If you're feeling lost, those libraries, Dr. Purvis or Randy is talking about are just collections of known chemical signatures that we call peaks. See, when Randy runs a sample through a mass spectrometer, he gets back a chart filled with peaks. And each peak represents a different molecule inside the chemicals. And the larger the peak, the more of that molecule that's there. So the overall pattern of those peaks helps identify what is in the sample. So you run your sample and get your peaks. Then run it against the library, which knows the patterns of many different molecules. When you get a match, you've identified your compound. But here's the problem. When Randy gets handed a spice packet, or a mushroom for that matter, and gets asked what's inside of it, there are thousands of chemicals inside, many of which don't have a signature in that library yet. So when you run this kind of analysis, a lot of those peaks don't match anything. You're looking at signals with no names. It's like trying to find the word poison in a book written in a language you don't speak. It's all noise, with no way to figure out what is a signal. But Randy has still used this exact approach to find poisons before. Not by looking for everything, but by focusing on what doesn't belong.
With the untargeted, it becomes a little easier if you actually are able to compare two samples. So if you have what you know, let's say the spice they were using before, and then they have the new spice, what you can do is actually use the untargeted to look for differences between those two. So then if you start having new peaks show up, you can specifically interrogate or look at what the identities of those peaks are when you compare those two samples.
So if the CDC or FDA had a sample of a regular morel mushroom and a sample of a morel mushroom from the outbreak, they could compare the two and try to identify if anything jumped out as a toxin. And of course, when they hit the end of the road with their targeted testing, that's exactly what they did.
So they used techniques like non-targeted lab testing. They found that the chromatographic profile of the sample mushroom was consistent with a locally purchased morel mushroom that they used for comparison.
Wow.
So while there were some slight differences seen between the two, none of those particular peaks were identified as compounds of interest.
Because they were similar, whatever's in the morels in Bozeman is probably in the morels that they had locally.
Right.
So whatever this toxin is, doesn't appear to be specific to the Bozeman mushrooms. And despite looking for literally everything, we still haven't found a source. I'm not sure what else they can do.
You can work backwards from what's in the blood or samples you can get from the people who were ill and work backwards from that. I have a bit of experience in that from a previous job in 2007. There was a bunch of dogs and cats that got sick from eating pet food. And we were able to actually take crystals that were formed in the kidneys of the animals and dissolve those crystals and test them and find out what was in the crystals. And then we worked our way back to see if that was in the food, and it was.
Wow. What was in it?
It was melamine and cyanuric acid.
Melamine. I thought there was a case where they were adding melamine to food.
Yeah, the protein was correlated to the amount of nitrogen. So they found a melamine molecule that was nitrogen rich and put it in the food to make it look like there was a higher quality protein. So that was an interesting one. What happened in that case was the melamine that they had used to contaminate the food was itself contaminated with cyanuric acid. And the two compounds together just clog up the kidneys. That was a huge case. It was the largest consumer recall ever at the time, but because there wasn't tens of thousands of signals in those samples, there was two. It was a giant peak of melamine and a giant peak of cyanuric acid.
Wow. That is interesting. So instead of looking for differences between two mushrooms, you could look for differences in the patient's blood compared to a normal sample.
And then it might be, then it would be more of a targeted question for the mushroom. Do I see that? Do I see that substance in the mushroom? But, if you only have one mushroom to test, then
you're out of luck, is what he's implying. As far as I can tell, this is some of the only testing the CDC and FDA didn't perform. And even if they had, it would still be a gamble. So one of the things we're working on here is there's been an outbreak of morel mushroom poisoning in Montana that has led to some deaths. And despite testing by some of our best government agencies, nothing is coming up positive. So targeted testing for metals and bacteria is all negative. And untargeted analysis was done on these mushrooms, but it didn't find anything. Would that be common?
There's really no one truly untargeted analysis because you can't extract everything from a sample. You're always going to have some sort of bias. And sometimes things can get buried. And by buried, I mean, if the thing is in there in a very high concentration, the peaks will come out very high. So if you're seeing really high peaks and you haven't seen that before, those may come out right away and you go, oh, wow, this is something that's in there in a huge concentration. But if it's something that's poisoning you and it takes a very little amount, then all of a sudden it might be kind of buried in the baseline of all the other peaks that are in there, and it may not be easy to find.
So we make a few assumptions on the outset. It has to be analyzable by mass spectrometry. You have to be able to ionize the molecule in order to detect it by mass spec. So if it's not ionizable, we won't see it. There's methods that are built for proteins and large molecules and methods that are built for small molecules. Those would be separate approaches as well. So if it's a larger protein toxin, a small molecule non-targeted test won't show that either.
No matter what testing we do, it's never going to be perfect because there are some things that just won't be detected with these methods. So despite the impressive analysis by the lab at the FDA, this is where it left Heather, our boots on the ground investigator.
The testing didn't give us a clear pathogen or source.
And that brings us to a bigger question. How do you prove something is toxic when you don't have any tests to show it? Well, it turns out this isn't the first time we've had to link a mushroom to deadly outbreak without any testing at all.
Montchavin, yes.
Montchavin.
Very unusual. In this small mountain village, maybe 930 inhabitants, 13 cases of ALS occurred, uniformly fatal, maybe 3 to 5 years after clinical diagnosis. It is a terrible disease.
In the next episode, we're going to take a quick detour to the French Alps in the small mountain town of Montchavin, where we will find out how researchers connected mushrooms with a devastating outbreak of ALS. This might help us understand how we can wrap up this Bozeman outbreak. And I don't want to give away too much, but the questions about the mushrooms involved in this outbreak feel a little too familiar.
They ate mushrooms, morels, and another one called chanterelle.
Can I pause you? You said morel or false morel?
No, they said morels.
That's next time on A Morel Dilemma. If you are finding anything in this series valuable, the best way to support the show is simple. Leave a rating, write a review, and share it with someone who should hear it. This project is completely independent. No funding, no sponsors, no institutions. Just an effort to help people understand how poisoning outbreaks are identified, investigated, and hopefully prevented. If you'd like to support the show more directly, there are 3 things you can do. Head to thepoisonlab.com/support to get access to all episodes early and ad-free, or check out our educational projects like Poisonous Fungus Among Us and the Gotta Pick 'em card game. Links are in the show notes. Either way, thanks for being here and for helping share this story. Because this won't be the last outbreak, but maybe together we can recognize the next one sooner. This show is written and produced by me, Ryan Feldman. Music is from Pixabay, featuring artists Vera Miller, Driver Silver, Lexan Music, and Rocco Garibaldi. Audio production and sound design by Max McClellan, MKM Audio. This show is a production of Clinical Toxicology, LLC.
6 people are now dead.
Investigators are focused on a spice that should never have been in food.
And state health officials are now working with federal agencies to find